Welcome back, friends, for the second portion of the Gospel of Mark, a Reader's Theater version of it. I just wanted to say a couple words in the interim here in between about the translation we're using. This is the Common English Bible Translation, which was produced in the 2010 time, 2008 to like 2011, 2012, was produced by a committee of scholars from a bunch of different religious Christian backgrounds and non-Christian scholars, Jewish scholars as well on it. It was like 150 scholars all working together with the most ancient versions of the text, translating directly from the Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek into a contemporary English version, and attempting to phrase it and frame it in a way that is accessible to a modern English reader. So it's what I would consider one of the better academic translations of the text and a reliable translation if you're wanting to get at a version that does its best to communicate what the Hebrew and Greek actually say. As we should know, translation is an art, not a science. There are always choices, interpretive choices that have to be made. And if you speak more than one language, then you'll be aware that there are just some concepts and some phrases that don't translate easily from one language to another. And particularly when we're translating stuff that's thousands of years old, it can be hard to know exactly the best choices to make in those ways. You may get this idea if you're familiar with the concept of some contemporary slang. If you know what a butt dial is, yeah, and you know what a booty call is, a booty call, you don't know what a booty call is, yeah. So that's a little, booty call is when you call someone in the middle of the night because you're horny and you want them to come visit you. Yeah. So, yeah, a butt dial, and a booty call. If you did not have the context for those, imagine you're someone 500 years from now looking at English and you're looking at the text and you're trying to figure out how am I going to translate this into the current language. If you don't understand the nuances between what those two different things are, it might be easy to make a mistake in the translation. So that's why it's important that we work with the best texts we can and we have the best scholars we can. And even with that, we know that the translations are going to be imperfect and they're going to be our best approximation of trying to understand these ancient texts. So that's a little word about the translation today. And with that, we're going to commence with the second portion of the Gospel of Mark. They entered Capernaum. When they had come into a house, he asked them,
"What are you arguing about during the journey?"
They didn't respond, since on the way they had been debating with each other about who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them,
"Whoever wants to be the first must be least of all and the servant of all."
Jesus reached for a little child, placed him among the 12, and embraced him. Then he said,
"Whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me isn't actually welcoming me, but rather the one who sent me."
John said to Jesus,
"Teacher, we saw someone throwing demons out in your name, and we tried to stop him because he wasn't following us."
Jesus replied,
"Don't stop him. No one who does powerful acts in my name can quickly turn around and curse me. Whoever isn't against us is for us. I assure you that whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you belong to Christ will certainly be rewarded.
And he continued,
As for whoever causes these little ones who believe in me to trip and fall into sin, it would be better for them to have a huge stone hung around their necks and to be thrown into the lake. If your hand causes you to fall into sin, chop it off. It's better for you to enter into life crippled than to go away with 2 hands into the fire of hell, which can't be put out. If your foot causes you to fall into sin, chop it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to be thrown into hell with 2 feet. If your eye causes you to fall into sin, tear it out. It's better for you to enter God's kingdom with 1 eye than to be thrown into hell with 2. That's a place where worms don't die and the fire never goes out. Everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? Maintain salt among yourselves and keep peace with each other.
Jesus left that place and went beyond the Jordan into the region of Judea. Crowds gathered around him again, and as usual, he taught them. Some Pharisees came, and trying to test him, they asked,
Does the law allow a man to divorce his wife?
Jesus answered.
What did Moses command you?
And they said,
Moses allowed a man to write a divorce certificate and divorce his wife.
Jesus said to them,
He wrote this commandment for you because of your unyielding hearts. At the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Because of this, a man should leave his father and mother and be joined together with his wife, and the two will be one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, humans not pull apart what God has put together.
Inside the house, the disciples asked him again about this, and he said to them,
Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if a wife divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery.
People were bringing children to Jesus so that he would bless them, but the disciples scolded them.
When Jesus saw this, he grew angry and said to them,
Allow the children to come to me. Don't forbid them, because God's kingdom belongs to people like these children. I assure you that whoever doesn't welcome God's kingdom like a child will never enter it.
Then he hugged the children and blessed them.
As Jesus continued down the road, a man ran up, knelt before him, and asked.
Good teacher, what must I do to obtain eternal life?
Jesus replied,
Why do you call me good? No one is good except the one God. You know the commandments. Don't commit murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't give false testimony. Don't cheat. Honor your mother and father.
Teacher,
He responded,
I have kept all of these things since I was a boy.
Jesus looked at him carefully and loved him.
He said,
You are lacking one thing. Go, sell what you own and give the money to the poor. Then you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me.
But the man was dismayed at this statement, and they went away saddened because he had many possessions.
Looking around, Jesus said to his disciples,
It will be very hard for the wealthy to enter God's kingdom.
His words startled the disciples, so Jesus told them again,
Children, it's difficult to enter God's kingdom. It's easier for a camel to squeeze through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter God's kingdom.
They were shocked even more and said to each other,
Then who can be saved?
Jesus looked at them carefully and said,
It's impossible with human beings, but not with God. All things are possible for God.
Peter said to him,
Look, we've left everything and followed you.
and Jesus said,
I assure you that anyone who has left house, brothers, sisters, mother, father, children, or farms because of me and because of the good news will receive 100 times as much now in this life. Houses, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and farms, and in the coming age, eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first.
Jesus and his disciples were on the road, going up to Jerusalem, with Jesus in the lead. The disciples were amazed, while the others, following behind, were afraid. Taking the 12 aside again, he told them what was about to happen to him.
Look,
He said,
we're going to Jerusalem. The human one will be handed over to the chief priests and the legal experts. They will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles. They will ridicule him, spit on him, torture him, and kill him. After 3 days, he will rise up.
James and John, Zebedee's sons, came to Jesus and said,
Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask.
What do you want me to do for you?
He asked. They said,
Allow one of us to sit on your right and the other on your left when you enter your glory.
Jesus replied,
You don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink or receive the baptism I receive?
We can.
They answered. Jesus said,
You will drink the cup I drink and receive the baptism I receive, but to sit on my right or left hand isn't mine to give. It belongs to those for whom it has been prepared.
Now, when the other 10 disciples heard about this, they became angry with James and John.
Jesus called them over and said,
You know that the ones who are considered the rulers by the Gentiles now show off their authority over them, and their high-ranking officials order them around. But that's not the way it will be with you. Whoever wants to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wants to be the first among you will be the slave of all. For the human one didn't come to be served, but rather to serve, and to give his life to liberate many people.
Jesus and his followers came into Jericho. As Jesus was leaving Jericho, together with his disciples and a sizable crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, Timaeus' son, was sitting beside the road. When he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was there, he began to shout.
Jesus, son of David, show me mercy.
Many scolded him, telling him to be quiet. but he shouted even louder.
Son of David, show me mercy.
Jesus stopped and said,
Call him forward.
They called the blind man.
Be encouraged. Get up. He's calling you.
Throwing his coat to the side, he jumped up and came to Jesus.
Jesus asked him.
What do you want me to do for you?
The blind man said.
Teacher, I want to see.
Jesus said,
Go. Your faith has healed you.
At once he was able to see, and he began to follow Jesus on the way.
When Jesus and his followers approached Jerusalem, they came to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives. Jesus gave 2 disciples a task, saying to them,
Go into the village over there. As soon as you enter it, you will find tied up there a colt that no one has ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you doing this, say, its master needs it, and it will send it back right away.
They went and found a colt tied to a gate outside on the street, and they untied it. Some people standing around said to them,
What are you doing? Untying the colt?
They told them just what Jesus said, and they left them alone. They brought the colt to Jesus and threw their clothes upon it, and he sat on it.
Many people spread out their clothes on the road, while others spread branches cut from the fields. Those in front of him and those were following shouted,
Hosanna, blessings on the one who came in the name of the Lord. Blessings on the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna in the highest.
Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. After he looked around at everything, because it was already late in the evening, he returned to Bethany with the 12.
The next day, after leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. From far away, he noticed a fig tree in leaf, so he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing except leaves, since it wasn't the season for figs. So he said to it,
No one will ever again eat your fruit.
His disciples heard this.
They came into Jerusalem. After entering the temple, he threw out those who were selling and buying there. He pushed over the tables used for currency exchange and the chairs of those who sold doves. He didn't allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He taught them.
Hasn't it been written, My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've turned it into a hideout for crooks.
The chief priests and legal experts heard this and tried to find a way to destroy him. They regarded him as dangerous because the whole crowd was enthralled at his teaching.
When it was evening, Jesus and his disciples went outside the city.
Early in the morning, as Jesus and his disciples were walking along, they saw the fig tree withered from the root up.
Peter remembered and said to Jesus.
Rabbi, look how the fig tree you cursed has dried up.
Jesus responded to them.
Have faith in God. I assure you that whoever says this to the mountain, be lifted up and thrown into the sea, and doesn't waver but believes that what is said will really happen, it will happen. Therefore, I say to you, whatever you pray and ask for, believe that you will receive it, and it will be done so for you. And whenever you stand up to pray, if you have something against anyone, forgive, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your wrongdoings.
Jesus and his disciples entered Jerusalem again. As Jesus was walking around the temple, the chief priests, legal experts, and elders came to him. They asked,
What kind of authority do you have for doing these things? Who gave you this authority to do them?
and Jesus said to them,
I have a question for you. Give me an answer, then I'll tell you what kind of authority I have to do these things. Was John's baptism of heavenly or of human origin? Answer me.
They argued among themselves.
If we say it's of heavenly origin, he'll say, Then why didn't you believe him? But we can't say it's of earthly origin.
They said this because they were afraid of the crowd, because they all thought John was a prophet.
They answered Jesus.
We don't know.
Jesus replied,
Neither will I tell you what kind of authority I have to do these things.
Jesus spoke to them in parables.
A man planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a tower. Then he rented it to tenant farmers and took a trip. When it was time, he sent a servant to collect from the tenants his share of the fruit of the vineyard. But they grabbed the servant, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Again, the landlord sent another servant to them, but they struck him on the head and treated him disgracefully. He sent another one. That one they killed. The landlord sent many other servants, but the tenants beat some and killed others. Now the landlord had one son who he loved dearly. He sent him last, thinking, They will respect my son. But those tenant farmers said to each other, This is the heir. Let's kill him and the inheritance will be ours. They grabbed him, killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard.
And Jesus continued,
So what will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it's amazing in our eyes.
They wanted to arrest Jesus because they knew that he had told the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away.
They sent some of the Pharisees and supporters of Herod to trap him in his words. They came to him and said,
Teacher, we know that you're genuine, and you don't worry about what people think. You don't show favoritism, but teach God's way as it really is. Does the law allow people to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay taxes or not?
Since Jesus recognized their deceit, he said to them,
Why are you testing me? Bring me a coin. Show it to me.
and they brought one. He said to them,
Whose image and inscription is this?
Caesar's.
they replied. Jesus said to him,
Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God.
His reply left them overcome with wonder.
Sadducees, who deny that there is a resurrection, came to Jesus and asked,
Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a widow but no children, the brother must marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman, and when he died, he left no children. The second married her and died without leaving any children. The third did the same. None of the 7 left any children. Finally, the woman died. At the resurrection, when they all rise up, whose wife will she be? All 7 were married to her.
Jesus said to them,
Isn't this the reason you are wrong? Because you don't know either the scriptures or God's power? When people rise from the dead, they won't marry, nor will they be given in marriage. Instead, they will be like God's angels. As for the resurrection from the dead, haven't you read in the scroll from Moses, in the passage about the burning bush, how God said to Moses, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He isn't the God of the dead, but of the living. You are seriously mistaken.
One of the legal experts heard their dispute and saw how well Jesus answered them. He came over and asked him.
Which commandment is the most important of all?
Jesus replied,
The most important one is Israel. Listen, our God is the one Lord, and
You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind, and with all your strength.
the second is this: you will love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these.
The legal expert said to him,
Well said, teacher. You have truthfully said that God is one and there is no other besides him, and to love God with all of the heart, a full understanding and all of one's strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more important than all kinds of entirely burned offerings and sacrifices.
When Jesus saw that he had answered with wisdom, he said to him,
You aren't far from God's kingdom.
After that, no one dared to ask him any more questions.
While Jesus was teaching in the temple, he said,
Why do the legal experts say that the Christ is David's son? David himself, inspired by the Holy Spirit, said,
The Lord said to my Lord, Sit at my right side until I turn your enemies into your footstool.
David himself calls him Lord, so how can he be David's son?
The large crowd listened to him with delight.
As he was teaching, he said,
Watch out for the legal experts. They like to walk around in long rows. They won't be greeted with honor in the markets. They long for places of honors in the synagogues and at banquets. They are the ones who cheat widows out of their homes, and to show off they say long prayers. They will be judged most harshly.
Jesus sat across from the collection box for the temple treasury and observed how the crowd gave their money. Many rich people were throwing in lots of money. One poor widow came forward and put in 2 small copper coins worth a penny. Jesus called his disciples to him and said,
I assure you that this poor widow has given in more than everyone who's been putting money in the treasury. All of them were giving out of their spare change, but she, from her hopeless poverty, has given everything she had, even what she needed to live on.
As Jesus left the temple, one of the disciples said to him,
Teacher, look, what awesome stones and buildings.
Jesus responded,
Do you see these enormous buildings? Not even one stone will be left upon another. All will be demolished.
Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives across from the temple. Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately,
Tell us, when will these things happen? What sign will show that all these things are about to come to an end?
Jesus said,
Watch out that no one deceives you. Many people will come in my name saying, I'm the one. They will deceive many people. When you hear of wars and reports of wars, don't be alarmed. These things must happen, but this isn't the end yet. Nations and kingdoms will fight against each other, and there will be earthquakes and famines in all sorts of places. These things are just the beginning of the sufferings associated with the end.
And he continued,
Watch out for yourselves. People will hand you over to the councils. You will be beaten in the synagogues. You will stand before governors and kings because of me so that you can testify before them. First, the good news must be proclaimed to all the nations. When they haul you in and hand you over, don't worry ahead of time about what to answer or say. Instead, say whatever is given to you in that moment, for you aren't doing the speaking, but the Holy Spirit is. Brothers and sisters will hand each other over to death. A father will turn on his children. Children will rise up against their parents and have them executed. Everyone will hate you because of my name, but whoever stands firm until the end will be saved.
and Jesus said,
When you see the disgusting and destructive things standing where it shouldn't be, then those in Judea must escape to the mountains. Those on the roof shouldn't come down or enter the houses to grab anything. Those in the field shouldn't come back to grab their clothes. How terrible it will be at that time for women who are pregnant and women who are nursing their children. Pray that it doesn't happen in winter. In those days there will be great suffering such as the world has never seen and will never see again. If the Lord hadn't shortened that time, no one would be rescued. But for the sake of the chosen, the ones whom God chose, he has cut short the time.
Jesus warned them.
Then if someone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there he is, don't believe it. False Christs and false prophets will appear, and they will offer you signs and wonders in order to deceive, if possible, those whom God has chosen. But you, watch out. I've told you everything ahead of time. In those days, after the suffering of that time, the sun will become dark, and the moon won't give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then they will see the human one coming in the clouds with such power and splendor. Then he will send the angels and gather together his chosen people from all four corners of the earth, from the end of the earth to the end of heaven.
Jesus taught him.
Learn the parable from the fig tree. After its branch becomes tender and it sprouts new leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, you know that he's near at the door. I assure you that this generation won't pass away until all these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will certainly not pass away.
Jesus cautioned.
But nobody knows what day or hour will come, not the angels in heaven and not the Son. Only the Father knows. Watch out. Stay alert. You don't know when the time is coming. It is as if someone took a trip, left the household behind, and put the servants in charge, giving them each one job to do, and told the doorkeeper to stay alert. Therefore, stay alert. You don't know when the head of household will come, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows in the early morning or at daybreak. Don't let him show up when you weren't expecting and finding you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to all, stay alert.
It was 2 days before Passover and the festival of unleavened bread.
The chief priests and legal experts, through cunning tricks, were searching for a way to arrest Jesus and kill him. But they agreed that it shouldn't happen during the festival. Otherwise, there would be an uproar among the people.
Jesus was at Bethany visiting the house of Simon, who had a skin disease.
During dinner, a woman came in with a vase made of alabaster and carrying very expensive perfume of pure nard. She broke upon the vase and poured the perfume on his head.
Some grew angry. They said to each other,
Why waste the perfume? This perfume could have been sold for a year's pay, and the money even given to the poor.
and they scolded her. Jesus said,
Leave her alone. Why do you make trouble for her? She has done a good thing for me. You always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do something for them. But you won't always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body ahead of time for burial. I tell you the truth that wherever in the whole world the good news is announced, what she's done will also be told in memory of her.
Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to give Jesus up to them. When they heard it, they were delighted and promised to give him money. So he started looking for an opportunity to turn him in.
On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, the disciples said to Jesus,
Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover meal?
He sent 2 of his disciples and said to them,
Go into the city. A man carrying a water jar will meet you. Follow him. Wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher asks, where is my guest room so that I can eat Passover meal with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs already furnished. Prepare for us there."
The disciples left, came into the city, found everything just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. That evening, Jesus arrived with the 12. During the meal, Jesus said,
"I assure you that one of you will betray me, someone eating with me."
Deeply saddened, they asked him, one by one.
It's not me, is it?
Jesus answered,
"It's one of the 12, one who's dipping bread with me into the bowl. The human one goes to his death just as it is written about him. But how terrible it is for that person who betrays the human one. It could have been better for him if he had never been born."
While they were eating, Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them, and said,
"Take, this is my body."
He took a cup, gave thanks, and gave it to them, and they all drank from it. He said to them,
"This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. I assure you that I won't drink wine again until that day when I drink in a new way in God's kingdom."
After singing songs of praise, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Jesus said to them,
"You will all falter in your faithfulness to me. It is written,
I will hit the shepherd and the sheep will go off in all directions.
but after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee."
Peter said to him,
Even if everyone else stumbles, I won't.
but Jesus said to him,
"I assure you that on this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times.
But Peter insisted,
If I must die alongside you, I won't deny you.
and they all said the same thing. Jesus and his disciples came to a place called Gethsemane. Jesus said to them,
Sit here while I pray."
He took Peter, James, and John along with him. He began to feel despair and was anxious.
he said to them.
"I'm very sad. It is as if I am dying. Stay here and keep alert."
Then he went a short distance farther and fell to the ground.
He prayed that if possible, he might be spared the time of suffering. He said,
"Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not what I want, but what you want."
He came and found them sleeping. He said to Peter,
"Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you stay alert for 1 hour? Stay alert and pray so that you won't give in to temptation. The spirit is eager, but the flesh is weak."
Again, he left them and prayed, repeating the same words. And again, when he came back, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open, and they didn't know how to respond to him. He came a third time and said to them,
"Will you sleep and rest all night? That's enough. The time has come for the human one to be betrayed in the hands of sinners. Get up! Let's go. Look, here comes my betrayer."
Suddenly, while Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came with the mob carrying swords and clubs.
They had been sent by the chief priests, legal experts, and elders. His betrayer had given them a sign.
"Arrest the man I kiss, and take him away under guard."
As soon as he got there, Judas said to Jesus,
"Rabbi."
Then he kissed him. Then they came and grabbed Jesus and arrested him.
One of the bystanders drew a sword and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his ear.
Jesus responded,
"Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me like an outlaw? Day after day I was with you teaching in the temple, but you didn't arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled."
and all his disciples left him and ran away.
One young man, a disciple, was wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They grabbed him, but he left the linen cloth behind and ran away naked.
They led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests, elders, and legal experts gathered. Peter followed him from a distance, right into the high priest's courtyard.
He was sitting with the guards, warming himself by the fire.
The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death, but they couldn't find any.
Many brought false testimony against him, but they contradicted each other. Some stood to offer false witness against him, saying,
"We heard him saying, 'I will destroy this temple constructed by humans, and within 3 days I will build another, one not made by humans.'"
But their testimonies didn't even agree on this point.
Then the high priest stood up in the middle of the gathering and examined Jesus.
"Aren't you going to respond to the testimony these people have brought against you?
But Jesus was silent and didn't answer. Again, the high priest asked.
Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?"
Jesus said,
"I am. And you will see the human one sitting on the right side of the Almighty and coming on the heavenly clouds."
Then the priest The high priest tore his clothes and said,
Why do we need any more witnesses? You've heard his insult against God. What do you think?
They all condemned him.
He deserves to die.
Some began to spit on him. Some covered his face and hit him, saying,
Prophecy!
Then the guards took him away and beat him.
Meanwhile, Peter was below in the courtyard. A woman, one of the high priest's servants, approached and saw Peter warming himself by the fire. She stared at him and said,
You were also with the Nazarene Jesus.
but he denied it, saying,
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand what you're saying.
and he went outside into the outer courtyard. A rooster crowed. The female servant saw him and began a second time to say to those standing around,
This man is one of them.
but he denied it again. A short time later, those standing around again said to Peter,
You must be one of them, because you are also Galilean.
but he cursed and swore.
I don't know this man you're talking about.
At that very moment, a rooster crowed a second time. Peter remembered what Jesus told him.
Before a rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times.
and he broke down, sobbing.
At daybreak, the chief priests, with the elders, legal experts, and the whole Sanhedrin, formed a plan.
They bound Jesus, led him away, and turned him over to Pilate. Pilate questioned him.
Are you the king of the Jews?
Jesus replied.
That's what you say.
The chief priests were accusing him of many things.
Pilate asked him again,
Aren't you going to answer? What about all of these accusations?
but Jesus gave no more answers, so that Pilate marveled.
During the festival, Pilate released one prisoner to them, whomever they requested. A man named Barabbas was locked up with the rebels who had committed murder during an uprising.
The crowd pushed forward and asked Pilate to release someone, as he regularly did. Pilate answered them.
Do you want me to release you to the king of the Jews?
He knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of jealousy, but the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas to them instead. Pilate replied.
Then what do you want me to do with the one you call the king of the Jews?
They shouted back.
Crucify him.
Pilate said to them.
Why? What wrong has he done?
They shouted even louder.
Crucify him.
Pilate wanted to satisfy the crowd, so he released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus whipped, then handed him over to be crucified.
The soldiers led Jesus away into the courtyard of the palace known as the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole community of soldiers. They dressed him up in a purple robe and twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on him. They saluted him.
Hey, king of the Jews!
Again and again, they struck his head with a stick. They spit on him and knelt before him to honor him. When they finished mocking him, they stripped him of the purple robe and put his own clothes back on him. Then they led him out to crucify him.
Simon, a man from Cyrene Alexander and Rufus's father, was coming in from the countryside. They forced him to carry his cross.
They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means skull place. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. They crucified him. They divided up his clothes, drawing lots for them to determine who would take what. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The notice of the formal charge against him was written.
The King of the Jews.
They crucified 2 outlaws with him, one on his right and one on his left. People walking by insulted him, shaking their heads and saying,
Ha! So you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, were you? Save yourself and come down from that cross.
In the same way, the chief priests were making fun of him among themselves, together with the legal experts.
He saved others,
They said,
but he can't save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down from his cross. Then we'll see and believe.
Even those who had been crucified with Jesus insulted him.
From noon until 3 in the afternoon, the whole earth was dark. At 3, Jesus cried out with a loud shout,
Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
which means,
My God, why have you left me?
after hearing him, some standing there said,
Look, he's calling Elijah.
Someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, and put it on a pole. He offered it to Jesus to drink, saying,
Let's see if Elijah will come to take him down.
But Jesus let out a loud cry and died.
The curtain of the sanctuary was torn in 2 from top to bottom.
When the centurion who stood facing Jesus saw how he died, he said,
This man was certainly God's son.
Some women were watching from a distance, including Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, the younger one, and Joseph, and Salome. When Jesus was in Galilee, these women had followed and supported him, along with many other women who had come to Jerusalem with him.
Since it was late in the afternoon on preparation day, just before the Sabbath, Joseph from Arimathea dared to approach Pilate and ask for Jesus' body.
Joseph was a prominent council member who also eagerly anticipated the coming of God's kingdom.
Pilate wondered if Jesus was already dead. He called the centurion and asked him whether Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that Jesus was dead, Pilate gave the dead body to Joseph. He bought a linen cloth, took Jesus down from the cross, wrapped him in the cloth, and laid him in a tomb that had been carved out of rock. He rolled a stone against the entrance to the tomb.
Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was buried.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they could go and anoint Jesus' dead body.
Very early, on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they came to the tomb. They were saying to each other,
Who's going to roll the stone away from the entrance for us?
When they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, and it was a very large stone.
Going into the tomb, they saw a young man in a white robe seated on the right side, and they were startled. But he said to them,
Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He has been raised. He isn't here. Look, here's the place where they laid him. Go tell his disciples, especially Peter, that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. You will see him there just as he told you.
Overcome with terror and dread, they fled from the tomb.
They said nothing to anyone.
Because
they were afraid.